I want to welcome you to our Cultural Consciousness and Competency series. It's a three-parter. So let me tell you a little bit about me. I am a life coach and I'm a trainer with a focus on social emotional interventions in corporate and educational settings. I was a lecturer for 15 years on the college level at CUNY York College, where I taught psychology. And I was fortunate enough to be able to start my own personal growth course. And I taught leadership and Black psychology there. And the population was 98% minority and basically all products of the New York City public school system. So it was largely economically challenged and disadvantaged, as some like to call them. I don't, but that is how people are categorized sometimes, children. And I like to think that we had a great impact on them by being fully aware of instituting some of the things that we're going to talk about today. Our objectives really for today are to have a better understanding of how our subconscious thought patterns and mental pathology show up and affect our approach to students and teaching. And we're also going to look at strategies to recognize the various mindsets in ourselves primarily, but also in our students. And we're going to look at some methods to mitigate disempowering mindsets and to support empowering mindsets. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted us to do this, because I want us to get into the habit, particularly in this next 2 hours, but hopefully ongoing past this, of looking at what you're thinking. Here's our agenda. We're going to be exploring different mindsets and their effects on teaching styles and student relationships. And we're going to discuss and create strategies for assessment and implementation of empowering mindsets. The first thing we're going to look at in this conversation of equity, cultural competency, and bias is really self-examination and honesty, right? Changing your mindset means like challenging your perspectives. Our thoughts, our opinions, our values, and our beliefs are often so deeply ingrained that sometimes it's difficult or even uncomfortable to start the process of really looking at how we think and what it's creating. So I'm here to help you with it. That's my job for today, okay? So your mindsets are really, they have the biggest impact on your success and failure in achieving your goals, and that's professional or personal. They are the bedrock for all your decisions, your actions, how you interpret things that happen to you, how you look at people, how you form your goals, and ultimately it leads to the culture of any entity. So it's going to lead to the culture in your classroom, depending on your administrator or the collective power, it will lead to the culture of your school building. And most of us know we have a need to achieve certain things, but there are reasons that we don't. And a lot of why we don't have successful execution has to do with our mindsets too, or why we don't sustain what it is we start. All of this has to do with the mindset. So we're just going to try to understand our default thinking that we aren't really noticing, right? We're kind of a lot of times on automatic pilot, and we're not really looking at how we think or what is causing and creating. A lot of times we're not taking responsibility for what we've created, just on our interpretations, how we think and how we respond and react to things based on our thoughts. So we're going to spend time examining these mindsets, just a few. I have a ton we could go through, but I picked just 6 of the ones that I feel like are the most impactful, and some you might be familiar with, because I have this saying that where the mind goes, the behind follows. And so we're going to take a good look at our minds today. So the first thing I want us to look at is the thought trail. And since thoughts are fundamental to everything we do, this is the cycle of how thoughts and actions affect each other. So just take a quick look. And so what this can look like, you have your thoughts lead you to beliefs. And what's big here is oftentimes people interact with their beliefs as though they're facts, right? And then you make a decision, or in this case, as we're looking, you'll make a goal based off your beliefs because you're holding them as something that's absolutely true. And then that's going to lead to certain actions, which will lead to success or failure, and that leads to another thought. And so the cycle goes, right? Unless it's interrupted. So an example for me is I hear educators all the time saying, I don't know how to reach these kids, right? And so sometimes that leads to a belief that they're not skilled enough to have impact with the children, which might lead to a goal of just like, well, I'll push the few that seem capable. And that's where I'll focus my attention on. And the action is that you give very little effort to the other children that you don't feel like you can reach. And then they'll have low scores, which will show you a failure. And then you'll be like, see, I can't reach these kids, right? Which could lead you to different beliefs. And ultimately, unless you interrupt it, you might end up deciding to leave the school or to think you're no good at teaching or to just write all children off. There are educators who have written children off. I'll talk about that later in terms of my experience, right? So I look at myself. When I was in grad school, I was a B student, like a solid B. I needed 3.0 and it seemed like that's what I was getting. And I had a belief about myself that I wasn't capable. Like I'm kind of dumb. Like I'm not an A student, I can't do that good. And so I set different goals for myself. But then I talked to my mentor, who was the head of the psychology department at my undergrad. And he said to me, like, Sharmayne, did you ever think that if you didn't have all the responsibilities you had, you might be a stronger student? Because at that point, my parents died like 2 months apart. So I had taken over the care of my grandparents. I had a full-time job that was like work. And I had a 4-year-old and I was separated, so I made up beliefs about who I was as opposed to, who I was given these circumstances, right? And when there was a shift in my thinking and my beliefs, then my goals became different, which led to different actions and actually higher grades because I stopped believing I couldn't do it or I was just a B student and somebody interrupted that thought pattern and had me think different. And then I was shifted my actions around how I organized my day, what I said yes to, no to, and studying. And I felt more capable, right? So that's what it can look like for you. That's what it can look like for the students. People will tell you where they live, and then you make some decisions about who they are, right? And that's very interesting. And we all do that. Your beliefs about who they are based on what they live can actually lead you to different goals around that relationship or with your students around what you've decided they're capable of, right? And so this is one of the reasons that we're going to look at the thought trail and our beliefs more, because we have to see how they're serving us and how they're serving the people that we're talking to, or trying to help or serve, like our students. Because oftentimes, once we have these beliefs and if we are interacting with them as though they're fact, we don't actually see what is factual and true because we're committed to that which we thought. And until we change our thinking, then you will continue to recycle your experiences. So you have to know the difference between whether what you're thinking is serving them or if there's room for exploration so that you can find out more, right? Because if we run on our assumptions and our beliefs, we're going to miss out on a lot that's true, and we're going to miss out on understanding a lot that's not true. So a lot of times we have to interrupt the pattern, and we have to know the difference between living and setting targets regardless of your past experiences with people or people from locations or what we've created for ourselves, right? Do we live in spite of them, or are we setting targets and living in reaction to them? right? Where any one of those little arrows are, you can have an intervention, so to speak, at any of those places and have a shift. And that might occur because you did it intentionally, you stopped yourself and chose different, or somebody else can realize what the pattern is. And we can do this for other people. That when we recognize what their thought trail is, we can effectually help them shift and change it by having interjections and interruptions where those arrows are, right? And question it. So I'm asking, my request is always that everybody question everything they're thinking. If your beliefs are not leading you to anything constructive, if they're disempowering, then more than likely they're not true, right? If they change, facts don't change, right? 2 + 2 is 4. But I like to use the example, some mornings I wake up and I think my belief is I am the hottest thing there is walking. And other mornings I wake up and I'm like, you need to go back to bed. You look crazy, right? It's clear that's a belief because it can change, right? Facts are facts. When you have beliefs that you hold on to, but there are other people who are able to offer you another perspective around that, then more than likely it's a belief, right? If it's subjective, generally it's a belief as well, right? Now, some beliefs align with facts, but even then, we make them conditional. And so you're not really holding it as a fact if there's a condition on whether it's true or not. Right. So there's the introspection on how this holds up in the general public, in general opinion, in its relativity outside of your own thinking. And then there's the look at how you interact with that thought. Is it a constant? And even if it's a constant, if it doesn't align with what other people have told you, then maybe it's a belief. Because beliefs have power, so much power. And we're going to look at narratives, which also really speak to our beliefs about ourselves. So, narratives, what are the stories that you tell yourself about yourselves and others? When we're talking now, we'll talk about others next, but we're going to talk about ourselves. What's the story you tell yourself about yourself, right? Your narratives directly determine your goal setting. They determine your approach to situations and people, and they determine your interactions, your interpretation of your interactions. And because this plays such a major, because of that, it plays such a major role in all our decision making in every area of our life. And I like to say, it's our BS that keeps us stuck. And by BS, I mean belief systems. All right? That's some BS that we carry around with us all the time, right? And we have to be mindful of them because we really get our meaning and our mattering from our story. And oftentimes we can really use our story to numb ourselves and to keep from changing or keep from moving to protect ourselves. So you really got to look at who you say you are. And like I was saying, when you reject what you have to look at what you reject that other people tell you about yourself, right? And there's no age limit on that. Like I'm still actively rejecting some of the things that people tell me about myself that are positive. Because I just can't find a way to believe it. Because my narrative that I have about myself don't support it. And so as educators and administrators, what's so important about that is it affects us in how we teach, right? If you have a certain narrative about yourself and your capability, your capacity, your popularity, your ability to communicate effectively, your ability to reach certain people, your ability to be open and receptive to certain things, it's going to affect how you teach. It's going to affect what you teach. It's going to affect what you find important within your lessons. It's going to affect how you interact with your students and your colleagues and your administrators, right? So whoever you say you are the evidence of that is going to show up. And outside with your spouses, with your siblings, all the S's, students, staff, spouses, siblings, it all shows up in all of those. And all the other stuff that I couldn't figure out an S for, friends, all your relationships. So I really want y'all to think about like who you say you are, right? Because it's really your decisions about yourself, not your conditions that are going to control not just your life, but it'll control how you contribute to other people's lives. And that's directly going to affect your classroom successes. So the questions right now are, do you tell your story in a way that propels you or it disempowers you? And also, are you using events as your excuses for why you aren't making certain moves in your life? Why certain things aren't happening for you professionally? Why you aren't accomplishing what you're looking to accomplish in the classroom? But this is a larger conversation, but I'm keeping it in this realm. Like, what are the stories? Is it the events or is it really what you do with the stories that's directing you? What should come from? Because as your narratives change, you'll make different choices and you'll have different goals. For me, I mentioned briefly that both my parents died when I was 47, but what I didn't say is that my father died homeless. And so it affected me and it affected what I did and what I didn't do. It affected who I befriended. It affected how I viewed myself as the child of somebody who died like this and as somebody who felt like maybe they had something to do with not helping them. And it affected me with colleagues because there was a less than conversation and it don't deserve to be here and this is what I come from versus what they come from conversation. And it affected me with students. And these are positive and negatives, but it affected what I wanted to teach, which is how I ended up teaching a lot of my, getting to create a course on personal growth so that I could help people move through these things. It affects what I do in professional development. It affected how I taught. It affected even initially my ability to think I had a right to teach. And so I approached it real mamby-pamby-ish, like, do I have the right to be in here? But it also helped me because I was with students who came from like backgrounds where there was a lot of trauma and drama. So I was a different kind of teacher for them, right? And it affected what I highlighted when I taught, and it affected how I framed things. It affected everything. And I was thinking when I was getting ready for this, how I taught death and dying for a year. And I didn't want to talk about any of the physiological parts of it because I'd watched it with my mother. I think it was too traumatic, but I wanted to teach like estate planning. This was a psychology class. And I was like focusing for weeks on estate planning for these people because I was like, you need to know what to do if somebody dies. And so my personal stuff affected even what I chose to teach in the class. I was like, psychology, they don't need no Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. They need to know about irrevocable living trust, right? So our narratives affect what we think, and it affects what we teach and how we teach and what we think is valuable. Particularly when there's a goal we have and we have somehow been stunted around it, what is the story I'm telling myself about myself? Because that's the only thing that can stop us. Because when we have a story about what we deserve and what we are equipped to do and what we're prepared to do or what we're willing to do to get to something, nothing can stop us. Right? And in this space, so it's true in the classroom. We will learn whatever we need to learn to affect the change we want to affect if we believe we can. Like we, ourselves, right? So it's very important to look to get rid of all of the external that we're willing to look at and to look at the narratives we have about ourselves. Because external is easy. We don't have to take 100% responsibility for that. Here's some things I want you to be aware of around your narratives. They're going to color how you view occurrences and how you show up in different situations. So you need to really look and see if your narratives are empowering or they're crippling, if they're causing you to fall short of your potential or to fail to adequately support somebody else. Because a lot of times we have narratives that keep us from being there for other people too? And will you be willing to see what narratives how they're affecting you? You know, really take a look and see how your narratives are affecting you. And that's hard work. And sometimes it gets real ugly when we have to like really sit there and look at ourselves, but it's going to help propel you and help your students, because sometimes you're holding your students the same way you're holding yourself. And so then your impact is lessened, right? A lot of times you don't hold anybody in terms of what they can accomplish any higher than you hold yourself. In terms of implicit biases, that's the story you tell yourself about others. So we need to really look at what's the story that we tell ourselves about others. Those are the two most important stories. What's the one you tell about yourself, and what are the ones you're saying about other people? So in terms of implicit biases, it's, you know, most of us like to believe that we're free thinking and we're fair-minded folks who treat everybody equally. But I'm here to tell you, implicit biases are an equal opportunity virus, right? Just like Corona. And the difference is everybody possesses implicit biases regardless of his or own group membership or what we think. We all have biases. And they only become a problem when we're not aware of the impact our biases have on other people, right? We're out here in the world every day looking at people and making decisions about them, good and bad. And I always give this example of how I saw this tatted up grunge couple. I live in New York. So I was in the Village, and it's like the hipster place to be. And there was this couple, and they were all tatted up and had the gauges in the ears and, you know, the dark greasy hair, and they were pale, and they had a baby. And they were so gentle and sweet and kind with this baby. In other words, they were normal. They were normal parents. But I was like really in awe that they were normal parents. Like, I don't know what I expected them to do, like throw the baby around, feed it a pork chop. I don't know what I thought, but I could see myself shocked, right? I had the wherewithal to have the noticing that I was surprised that they were parents like everybody else is a parent. So clearly I have some kind of bias. There's some kind of opinion I had about them, that I was holding them as some kind of people that were, I don't know, mean and torturous and whatever. I still don't know exactly what it was, but I know what it wasn't. I didn't hold them as normal. Now here's the thing. How would I feel or treat a child who had tatted up parents that came to school? What would the story that I make up about that child be, or about the parents and what kind of parents they are? You know, I used to have my tongue pierced, and one of my friends was like, "You're gonna go to parent-teacher conference with that thing in your mouth?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was a really good parent, but I was like, I'm not gonna be talking like, you know, like I don't think she's gonna alarm the teacher. But my friend was worried that they would think something of me, aside from the fact that my daughter went to school in a district that was only 14% Black. And so, you know, we were working harder to let them know that we were good parents. And she's like, and now you pierced your tongue and you ruining it. Because she was worried about what the story would be. But what would my story be? What if I had a kid that was all tatted up? And I've had them. I've had to check myself, because now I know that I have some stories around that. Because I could really start, you know, treating them differently. So we have to look at our biases. They're not always that obvious. But if we can notice ourselves in reaction to different people and different attributes about people or about their actions, if we can look at who we are, it'll tell us a little bit about the biases that we have. And then you can try to figure out and see if they're affecting you, particularly in the classroom. Because it might seem seemingly trivial to you, but it might really affect who you are in the classroom. Because I want people to really understand that you have biases. None of us are above them. And it doesn't make us bad people, it just makes us normal. And our biases start at the age of 3. we're already having biases. Some of them are taught to us, and some of them we make up just by things that happen to us. So imagine, some of us, we have a certain age, we've had a lot of years to collect up these biases, and we're walking around here unaware of them. That's an issue. And social science demonstrates that one does not have to be a racist with a capital R or one who intentionally discriminates on the basis of race to harbor implicit racial biases. So just because you don't, hate anybody or have anything, don't think that that means you don't have racial biases. Racial biases, as the slide said, refers to attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner, right? So they're generally involuntary and they happen without our awareness or intentional control. But if we're reflective, we'll have a noticing around where they show up in our lives. So I just want to share a few characteristics. Implicit biases are pervasive. Everybody possesses them, even people who are vowed to be impartial, such as judges. And we've seen it in sentencing stories. So, we all have them, even when we swear we don't and we swear we're not going to, and we're going to be conscious of them. Implicit and implicit biases are related but distinct mental constructs. So they are not mutually exclusive, but they may reinforce each other. And the implicit associations we hold don't necessarily have to align with our declared beliefs or even reflect stances that we would explicitly endorse. So you might really feel like you're, Black Lives Matter, right? But then end up in a situation where you're with a few Black people and you get scared. And so you have a bias and it doesn't align with what you really believe about yourself and what you're proclaiming. And that's not unusual, right? Implicit biases are malleable. So we can actually gradually unlearn some of our biases with debiasing techniques. So that's like our good news. But you can't unlearn them until you're willing to take the look and find out what your biases actually are, right? And there are several ways that biases can morph into discrimination and oppression. 3 I'd like to talk about. One is by commission. So that's like committing an act. Something like recommending community college to a good student, right? And I've seen that happen a lot of times. You don't want to give your parents the financial hardship. You should start here and then work your way up. Just see if college really works for you, to a student that's a really good student, right? I always talk about not learning ethnic names. That's a big one. People don't think about it, but if it was important to you to understand people's culture, it would be important to you to learn the names which actually support and show the world how important their culture is to their family, right? Or offering different assignments to students. When I first started teaching, I was advised to not worry about grammar and sentence structure or composition, as long as the students understood, I could understand that they understood the concept. This is college, right? And they thought they were doing these kids a favor. But that was their biases that had now turned into an oppressive behavior where they weren't even calling the students up higher anymore. So I rejected that. And let me tell you, a lot of the students were surprised at their grades that they got on certain things. But I also gave opportunities for the work to be done over with input, because I had a different kind of belief around them. And that's not going to be done when you have a bias or a belief that now takes over in that manner. Another way is by omission, leaving someone out of a group or allowing very few access or invitation. That happened to my daughter, had a 96 average in Spanish, but they wouldn't put her in AP Spanish. And she had that throughout her career, right? So there was a bias. And she said the class was all white and Spanish kids. So it can show up that way, or by ignorance, ignoring oppression through your spiritualization, trivialization. Oh, it's not a big deal. Universalism, all lives matter, or being very particular. Well, that only occurs here or there, so it's not a big deal. So you really have to look at the stories that you're telling yourself about others and how they show up in your teaching. And I gave a few examples. Another is that I think is very important is how some of the values that are and talents that kids have outside of the classroom in their communities and homes are not acknowledged in schools. Schools don't see the values of certain things. And so they don't see the intellect and the talents of the kids.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. Did you see the moonwalking bear?
Go!
It's easy to miss something you're not looking for. So to me, the lesson here is, it's easy to miss what you're not looking for or assume will not be there. I add on to that. And conversely, you will see what you are looking for. So what are you looking for in your students? What could you be missing? Because you're focused on whatever it is that you've decided is important, or whatever you've been told to focus on by your administrators. And so you're not focused on all these other things that might be occurring. When I was teaching, I didn't care what class it was. I found a way to have my students write autobiographies that tied in to what was going on. And it was a way, and I use it as a solution sometime. I don't know if I have it on here, I can't remember, of me finding out what was occurring with them so that it was a slick way of being nosy, because they'll tell their stuff because they're dying to let somebody know what's going on with them, particularly if it's a great success or if it's a great trauma. They really want people to know. And then I could tailor my courses or little statements, throw a little something in there here and there so that they know that I'm knowing. I even had students where I had them do journals in the personal growth and they would hashtag stuff. So I would make my comments in hashtags so that and that really tickled them, because like, wow, she's like really interacting with this material. And you know what, students, I had a student laugh one time and I'm like, what are you laughing at? You really read this stuff. Right? Because teachers aren't even reading this stuff because they don't really, I'm not reading all this, they ain't saying nothing. I just need them to do the exercise, right? So we have to be mindful of what we're buying into and what narratives we're contributing to their narratives sometimes. So how are we contributing to their narratives, right? Because it all begins and ends with the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and the stories we tell ourselves about others can contribute to the stories that they start to tell about themselves. And educators are interacting with these students more intimately for longer hours of a day than a lot of parents are. So oftentimes we're make or breaking them even more so than the family is, based on what we've decided about them. Even the narratives that kids have around what's possible for them in terms of careers, right? Particularly if you come from a community that has had limited opportunities or families that have had limited opportunities, and they have a narrative around what they're capable of or what's possible for them. You all have that opportunity to show them through example or personal story about, it doesn't have to be around career, but you can tell them about your disempowering beliefs and what they led you to and how you shifted them and how you now created this for yourself. I used to tell all my business because I needed those kids to know, like, I came from really a horrific childhood. And I had the same mentor that helped me in grad school said, you need to teach because the kids need to see you. Not that you'll be a particularly strong teacher, but, and that was my add in, but some of these kids will never see a Black MBA. He's like, and you're kind of cool. Because I took them out right now, but I have 15 piercings still. And I used to have my tongue pierced. And, I fancy myself still kind of hip happening and now. So you didn't have to be like a cornball to be able to be successful. And you could come from this community and have gone to this college and still be able to create a lot of the things. I've created really great things for myself. So I tell the kids my stories. And my dean of the school that I was at, it took her 14 years to get a bachelor's, and she had a GED, and now she's PhD. So she tells that story because kids need to see that. So if you can share with them on those levels around how you overcame circumstance and situation and disempowering mindsets and opinions that people put on you, and that would help them in terms of career choices and what they see as possible too. But that also requires you to not be attached to your story. And a lot of people are attached to their story. I wouldn't tell my story before because I was convinced of what it would make people think about me. Culturally competent leaders, right, work to understand their own biases as well as patterns of discrimination. And they have the skills or acquire the skills to mitigate the negative attendance and the effects on student achievement, and they have the personal commitment and courage to persist. It takes a lot to really be willing to be culturally competent and to look at yourself and to keep doing the work. And it's ongoing, right? There are things that have been instilled in you from childhood, from TV, from family, from the news, media, and to think that you will just be able to eliminate them, with one instance and one awareness is just really naive on anybody's part. It is constant work, and it takes courage to admit where we all fall short, right? So taking that look at yourself constantly in every moment that you're in certain interactions and being willing to admit it to yourself and maybe even to others is big. Because our kids, they pick up on everything. They're super perceptive. They can tell, the slightest hint of anger, disgust, or insincerity. And our biases creep up in our interactions with the kids. And the students notice it. So we really have to learn how to manage our biases. And how can we expect our kids and students to be culturally responsive and welcoming if we're not? And a lot of times I talk about the effects of this on minority students. And the other day I was thinking about the effects it has on the majority, because while they're not being the ones that are maybe being impacted negatively by this, they're certainly learning how to look at and how to view minority students. So sometimes we're teaching them to have more biases. We have to model cultural tolerance and acceptance of all. And that's something I can't help you with, because that courage has to come from you. But when schools here in America are largely becoming more and more minority, they're almost 60% minority now, but the teachers are 80% white, and really mostly white middle-class women teaching minority, lower income families. There's a disconnect there oftentimes with not only the experiences, but how they relate, but often how they look at the students and how the students look at and view them. So it needs more of a commitment for the teacher to understand and be open to what they have. And I see it too, Charles. And I was like, there's somebody walking on the moon next door. And, working with the kids, meeting them where they are and knowing that they matter and everything about them is okay, because culture matters. And there's a clash of cultures right now between who teaches and who's the student. in most schools. And so we have to become culturally competent and learn more about the student. And that requires looking into learning more about their families, learning more about where they come from, learning more about their language, their music, their heroes, knowing more about their history so that you can inject it into your lessons and what you're doing, so that these students know that who they are is valued in the classroom, and that we as educators care enough about them to learn more about who they are and what matters to them. Because some of these kids, all they have is their culture to hold on to, right? Because their family life doesn't support their growth and their boldness and their mattering, but their culture does. I want to look at fixed and growth mindsets really quickly, and I'm sure as educators, you all have been exposed to these two mindsets, right? That was like the buzz for a while, but what I realized is a lot of people weren't, they were talking about it, but they weren't being about it. And in your booklets, there was a series of questions on the second page. So I'm going to go through them real quick and tell you which mindset that it speaks to. The first one, I prefer to see immediate results on my projects, is fixed mindset. I'm okay with waiting to see the fruits of my labor come to path, growth. Your intelligence is something very basic about you that you can't change very much, fixed. No matter how intelligent you are, you can always change it quite a bit, is growth. You can learn new things, but you can't really change how intelligent you are, fixed. You can always substantially change how intelligent you are, growth. You are a certain kind of person. There's not much that can be done to really change that. You are who you are, fixed. No matter what kind of person you are, you can always change substantially, growth. You can do things differently, but the important parts of who you are can't really be changed, fixed. You're either good at something or not, fixed. If you have to work too hard to try and learn something, you should move on to what you are capable of, fixed. I'd rather work on a puzzle I'd previously put together than try a harder one, fixed. I love a challenge, growth. We're all both, right? We're even in the same situation. Sometimes might be more fixed than growth, or vice versa, but we all have a natural proclivity, right? So yours might be fixed, but you recognize it, and so you're trying to come from a growth place. The thing is, oftentimes our languaging will reflect that, and then that doesn't support the student, right? And sometimes even when we feel like we're giving growth messages, we're giving fixed messages, because that's our natural proclivity. So nobody's either all or one or the other all the time and in different situations. I'm growth in a lot of ways all the time, but like when it comes to sports, I'm fixed. I have decided that I have no hand-eye coordination, and I will never be good at sports, and I'm not even trying. That's it, right? But there are other things. I used to be fixed around technology, and I spoke that over myself. My narrative was, I'm technologically challenged. And now I fiddle around. Like I made this PowerPoint, right? There was a time I used to give my notes to people and have them make them for me. I can't do that. But there's so many things I do now because I have a growth mindset around it. I just have to figure it out. I can do the work. I can learn this, right? So there's been a shift, and so I've shifted. So fixed is, basically you feel like you have to be a natural at something. Either you have it or you don't. Nature has set you up. That's who you are. You hear people all the time, especially as you get older. This is it. I'm, 50, whatever years old. If I'm who I'm gonna be from now on, and they've decided that. Meanwhile, I know some 80-year-olds that, are on TikTok, So that's what that looks like. But if you have some surprises, take a look at it. Fixed. I'm either good at it or not. Like we said, when they get frustrated, they give up. They don't like to be challenged. There's judgment around failure. They need to constantly be affirmed in who they are. The relationships sometimes are really, hard for other folks because they have to constantly bolster their ego, and with growth mindsets, I can learn it if I want to. When I'm frustrated, I will persevere. I'm not just going to give up. They look to challenge themselves. They want you to tell them how to do it. Like, just help me learn how to do it. I know I can do it, right? And if they succeed, it's inspiring to them. It doesn't tell them who they are. It just tells them that they're capable of accomplishing certain things. There's no attachment to what kind of person they are or their capacity based on their success or their failure, right? It just tells them if they're moving in the right direction or not. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time to catch up, but just know that a lot of fixed people, there's a judgment. There's constantly a judgment, and there's labels attached to everything. So it's good is bad, or right is wrong. It's I'm smart, I'm dumb. And particularly for students, how it can show up. I want to go to students. Some things students might say to explain their grades is, I'm just stupid, or I suck at math, or they'll put the judgment on the teacher. The teacher's a slob, their breath stank, they can't teach, I don't understand their accent. It becomes personal, right? They find hard transitions as a threat, and that means it'll unmask their flaws. They don't want to have to show effort. If I'm putting effort into it, that means I'm not good at it. If I'm not good at it, then what does that say about who I am? Because it defines me, right? So they're the ones who might try to do the puzzle or stay at a different level. This is with adults too, but I want you to see it in the students. They'll rather stay on the same level where they can excel and be the smart one than try anything else. And they lie and they cheat more because they need to be the one that does good, right? So adolescence becomes one big test for them. Am I smart or am I dumb? Am I good looking? Am I ugly? Am I cool? Am I a nerd? Am I a winner or am I a loser? And whatever those things are, that's basically who they're going to decide they'll be forever. So it's really important for us to be able to combat that. And then sometimes what we'll do when we have a fixed way of trying to affirm them, we'll say, oh my gosh, you learned that so quickly. You're so smart. And that leads kids to a fixed mindset. You're so brilliant. Wow, you got an A and you didn't even have to study. You're natural at that. This is your thing, right? When we should be trying to praise them around their efforts and their hard work or the process. Wow, I noticed that, how hard you were studying. This is so great that you were able to bring your grades up like that. Or if they do it really fast, like, I apologize to you because I haven't given you enough work to challenge you. So we're going to give you something else to do that I think might help challenge you and help you develop this skill better. Not like, whoa, you finished that quick. You're great. That makes people want to fix mindsets. They want that all the time. You have to say, wow, we have to give you something that's going to require more effort out of you so that you can really grow and learn more. This is too easy. So we have to be mindful of our compliments and what they say about the students and what they tell the students about what works and what doesn't work, right? With a growth mindset, like we said, these kids really understand, and the adults understand that with effort and doing the work and learning and getting help, that they'll be able to achieve more. So students that have growth mindsets, when failing is looming, they'll mobilize their resources and they'll dig in and do what it takes. When I was in 10th grade 6 years ago, I was in geometry and I was like failing. And I stayed home and I just dug into it for like a whole weekend from Friday through. And I had a test and I got a 90 something on the test and my teacher thought I cheated because there was such a shift in what I did, but I had a growth mindset around it. I just have to like really mobilize, dig in, practice these homework questions, figure this out, get my friend who was doing well in it to help and explain it to me. I know I can get this. I just have to do the work. And I'm telling you, it was such a turnaround. My teacher didn't believe that I had done it. But that's what a growth mindset looks like. They believe working hard is something that makes you smarter. It's not something that makes you vulnerable. They're willing to put in the work. And I can only imagine that some of us have had a student, we're like, okay, I didn't expect that from them, right? Because we'd already made up our mind about what they were capable of. And I don't care if it's even singing. You ever see somebody and then they sing and they have a whole different voice than you decided they were supposed to have? All right? That's how that shows up. Like, okay. I tell people all the time, anytime you're like this about something, recognize that you already had an opinion and or bias about that, right? Anything that surprises you, you'd already made up your mind about it. And now somebody showed you something different. So I don't hold it against them. I mean, I was mad in the moment, but I understand it now. He had already written me off. He had a fixed mindset. She can't do this math. She didn't do that good on these first two tests. That's it. She's going to be one of the students that fail. And we do that sometimes. When we're fixed around certain things that happen, when we see a student on a certain trajectory, we've already decided that's who they are, that's what they're capable of. This is not their thing. And, at best, we'll socially promote them. And we get to look at that. That's why we don't offer them additional help or resources or try to figure out different ways to teach certain things, because we're like, if you can do this, you'll learn it this way. If you can't do it and learn it this way, and if you tutoring didn't help you, oh well. But that takes the onus off of us. But that's our fixed mindsets that put us in that position to approach things that way, or to be willing to negate what's possible for students. Growth mindset kids, when we talk to them, we can say things like, and this helps kids. You can actually help children move from fixed to growth, just like you can, right? You want to say things like, I really like that you tried all of those strategies on that assignment until you finally got it, right? So they know, okay, the way to learn is to just keep trying different things until I get it. You really studied and the improvement shows. I admire how you concentrated and finished that assignment. And, like I said, that was easy, I see. I apologize for not giving you work that would make you use more of your brain. We're going to give you some work so you can use more of your brain. You point out what they've done well, then you give a strategy to help them improve. Everybody learns different. Just have to keep trying until we find a way that works best for you, is a message to give students. Right? I'm in a doctoral program now. We were talking about this now because a lot of us are talking about our shortcomings, and our instructors are trying to help us find ways around them, as opposed to like, no, let me, tell you something. One of them used to teach Evelyn Wood speed reading. That's for us old school people. She said, anybody heard of that? I was too ashamed to admit it. But, and she was giving some ways. You say you're a slow reader. Let's help with this. Here's a strategy that will help you with reading. Take an index card and put it on the line so it blocks off all the other things so you don't get distracted. They didn't just go, you're going to have to struggle through this because, it is what it is. They were like, no, here's some strategies to help that. Anybody else have some strategies? Was there anybody else that used to read slowly and have it, get the Audible, do this, do that. That's teaching from a growth mindset, where you don't allow people to decide that they are this thing. I'm a slow reader. I'm not good at math. I'm not this. No, there's some strategies. Let's figure them out for you. And that sets the kid up to understand that. Lastly, as I run through this, question thinking. And what I like about question thinking is that all great results really start with great questions, right? Learning happens through questions. You got dressed this morning based on questions you asked yourself, right? What's the weather going to be like? What's my schedule like? Who's going to be in the house? Do I have to go on Zoom? All of that stuff helps you in terms of coming to decisions. Now we have to think about what questions we're asking about our students. And that will propel us and make us understand what answers that we have around them as well. And when we have students ask the right questions, it takes them to different results as well. So one of the examples I love to give is about nomads. You know, nomads were, the question that determined where they settled was, where is the water? How do we get to some water? Now, civilization changed completely when the question became, how do we get water to get to us? Then they could be stationary, and it created a whole bunch of new questions and new actions and ways of thinking. Instead of trying to figure out the best way to get the water, they started thinking of the best way to get water to them. Change their results, change their lives, change civilization. And that's really what it can look like for us in a classroom. If we start thinking of different kinds of questions, it'll start a whole chain of questions and actions and answers that we're looking for. The way to solve problems is not really coming up with solutions, it's coming up with different questions. And if there's something that's not working for you, I'm going to suggest it's because you haven't figured out the right questions to ask. But the really great thing about questions to me is it also helps you determine who you are. Because our questions usually fall into one of three categories. They're either learner questions or they're judger questions. And the third category is switching questions, when you realize you're in judger and you're trying to get yourself out of it. So the last page on your worksheet, I gave you some questions. And this is them lined up as to whether they're judger questions or they're learner questions. And here's the thing, judger questions and judger mindsets impede both your teaching and your learning. So the goal is really to accept your judger, but practice learner. We all got judger, we all have learner, just like fixed and growth, every mindset. None of us is all on the better side of thinking, or the more empowering, I should say. A lot of us, we have disempowering ways of thinking, and mindsets reside in all of us, and we all exercise them. All right, so when you look at these questions versus the ones that I put on the sheet, you can see which questions you typically ask when in certain situations, and that will tell you if you come from a place of judger or learner. And that's going to impede you in your teaching if you are coming from judger all the time. What's wrong with them? What's wrong with them doesn't set you up to try to figure out how to help the child or what they're good at, right? So it's important for classrooms, and it's important for teams as it is for individuals to make sure that when you're asking the questions, a lot of you all had, in the beginning of the year, you get together as a team in your school and talk about different things that you want to occur. And when the questions are asked, if you're not in learner, it doesn't lead you to expanding and growing. Judger is going to take you to a dead end. And best believe we're all recovering judgers. But the thing is that judger begets judger and learner begets learner. No one can help anybody from a judger place. So for the purpose of this conversation, how can you support or assist or develop an authentic relationship when you are in judgment of someone because of their race, their culture, their economics, or their community values? You know, how can you then start to see their value, ability, or their contributions? And that's what all of this is about, is helping you all to start looking at the awareness of who you are and what your come froms are and how they're affecting you in terms of being able to be effective educators and instructors and create an environment that's safe and nurturing for your students to grow. So it's a hard question to answer, but it becomes easier when you realize it's really about stopping, noticing, what you're doing and then choosing something else, choosing to help in a different way. I put switching questions in the download booklet that you have that can help you with looking at ways to get out of judger and into learner. And there's a little map in there, a choice map, that helps you in terms of observing where your questions are coming from and choosing your path or seeing what path you're going down and then switching. And that all happens with questions. Because if you think about any relationship you're in, you're asking a ton of questions of yourself and sometimes a ton of questions of them to try to determine every step of the relationship, right? Particularly when there's a disruption in the relationship. Then you have a lot of questions, usually for them and not for you. Or if you have questions, a lot of them come from a judger place, and that's not going to move things forward, right? So the secret to being really effective and satisfied in our lives begin with the ability to distinguish our learner and our judger as part of our question thinking. So when you get a chance, take a look at this. And I usually advise people to print out a couple of these and put them in places where they have important relationships occurring so that they can stop themselves sometimes and think about where they're directing the conversation or where their come from is in that moment. You want to ask questions to gather information. You want to ask questions to create understanding and learning, not to make decisions about who people are. You want to ask questions to search for and challenge assumptions. That's your assumptions, that's their assumptions, that's the group's assumptions. You want to ask questions to build, improve, and sustain your relationships, and for clarity or confirmation of what you heard. So what did I hear you say? Let me make sure I got this right. Were you saying this or that? To stimulate creativity and innovation, to set goals. That's how you want to, that's the kind of questions you want to ask. Not to pigeonhole anybody, not to prove you're right, not to make somebody wrong, right? And we do that a lot because sometimes we, in our desire to be right and shine, we ask questions to make other people look bad or to feel bad, right? And so for best results, you know, these are things you should consider. What assumptions am I making about myself and others? What am I assuming from the past that might not be true now, right? The beliefs versus facts. What am I assuming about available resources? What am I assuming about what's impossible or what is possible? These questions right here will take you a long, long way. Because particularly now when resources are so limited and there's so many conversations about what can't occur and what can occur. I don't know if you all are teaching virtually or not, or hybrid and half days, but there's a lot of conversations about what can't happen. And then I see online people creating all this amazing experiences for their students because they ask different questions, right? So look at that. And here's a few strategies that you can use to shift your students through learner questions. But it's good questions to have, particularly if you find students that are stuck in judger, that you can ask them to help shift them to learner. This has been great, you all. I appreciate all of your input and willingness to share. I will be back on Thursday. We will be talking cultural competency. You know, first we have to take a look inside and then we can look at how to affect things outside and what to create. So we'll be going more in depth in that in terms of creating culturally competent classrooms and our cultural competency and what it can look like.